Security Council. That news just coming into CNN. I also want to bring you up to speed on other stories in the region and the attacks that we've been seeing across the board, specifically in Baghdad, in neighboring Iraq today. Iraqi officials say Iranian drones targeted the U.S. embassy in the heavily fortified Green Zone. Videos, so we've got geolocated by CNN, showing a bright orange explosion and thick black smoke rising from the area. Iraq's Interior Ministry confirming another drone fell near the Al Rashid Hotel in the Iraqi capital. Authorities say there are no casualties or significant material damage. Now, Iran hasn't updated its official death toll from U.S. and Israeli strikes in over a week, but a U.S.-based human rights group reporting more than 1,300 civilians and 1,100 military personnel have been killed. Lebanon's health ministry saying close to 900 people have been killed since Israeli attacks began on March 2nd. However, CNN cannot independently verify these figures. More now from CNN's Jeremy Diamond.
Certainly, Israel and the United States have been pummeling Iran with airstrikes in recent days. In fact, they're expanding their strikes because of the fact that they've destroyed so much of Iran's air defenses. And here in Israel, we're continuing to watch one wave after the next of ballistic missiles being fired at Israel. Just moments ago, air raid sirens sounding in northern Israel, warning of yet another incoming Iranian ballistic missile. We saw earlier today not only barrages of Iranian ballistic missiles, some of which were outfitted with cluster munitions that made impact and caused damage across the country, but also Hezbollah rocket in northern Israel that struck near the town of Nahariya in that part of the country, injuring several individuals. But meanwhile, today what we've seen is an expansion of Israel's ground operation in southern Lebanon, sending troops into several more of those villages along the border where the Israeli military is aiming to, they say, destroy Hezbollah infrastructure to try and make the situation more stable for northern Israeli residents living along that border. It is another step by Israel to go deeper into southern Lebanon, but certainly not the kind of all-out ground operation that we know the Israeli military is preparing for, and which the Israeli Prime Minister is currently considering, and which tonight we're hearing multiple European countries urging Israel not to take that step. Instead, we know that there are discussions about the potential for the direct diplomacy between Israel and Lebanon. So far, none of that is really gaining traction. But in the meantime, we are seeing the continuation of Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon, including in the Lebanese capital. All of that now resulting in a huge toll in Lebanon, more than 800 people killed, of which at least 100 are believed to be children, according to the Lebanese health ministry. And the Israeli defense minister today saying that hundreds of thousands of people in southern Lebanon who've been displaced, they won't be allowed to return to their homes, he says, until the residents of northern Israel can be safe from the threat of Hezbollah.
I want to bring in Maha Yahya, director of the Carnegie Middle East Center. She joins me now live from Beirut. Maya, great to have you with us. And we've seen increased strikes in Beirut. We've got a number of over 700,000 people displaced across Lebanon. But I want to start off quick with just give me an indication of what it's like in Beirut right now.
Good morning, Elena. Thank you for having me. It's very anxious. People are very worried. The city is overrun. It's literally an open-air parking lot. Many people who've been displaced, or I would say the majority of those who've been displaced from the south. There are more than 1 million people that have been displaced as a result of the ongoing conflict and Israeli evacuation notices. Many of them have moved to Beirut or Saida, the main cities.
Thank you for that update. I'm sure it must be very difficult. We're seeing some of these images, specifically the targets in Beirut and also southern Lebanon. But I want to shift focus, and you've called Hezbollah a suicide mission. What is the political price, would you say, for Shia leaders who backed its war, and how does that shift power, specifically in Beirut?
Shia leaders, I mean, it's mainly Hezbollah that has backed this decision. Frankly, the decision was taken by the military arm of Hezbollah under immediate direction of the IRGC. Everyone knows this. And then the political leadership of Hezbollah tried to play catch up and adopt the narrative that was done in retaliation for the assassination of their spiritual leader, Ali Khamenei, but also as a kind of coordinated front with Iran. Internally, the war is extremely unpopular, both within the Shia community, but I would say across the country, and it's generating a lot of tensions. The Shia community in particular feels that they now there's a target on their backs because people are being hunted in very different parts of the country. There is no real safe area as such, if you like. So it's creating a lot of tensions on the ground. And the concern is that as time passes, the more brutal the bombing campaign is, the more people that are being forcibly forced to leave their homes, and then threats of never being able to go back home, threats to vaporize their areas. And all of this is going to turn, I think, to allow people to rally with Hezbollah, frankly. It's a flip side. Those that were upset that this war was launched may turn against them in the long run.
So you've also called this Gaza 2.0. We've seen entire neighborhoods impacted. So I want you to explain that, but also the significance now of Israel expanding its ground offensive in southern Lebanon.
What we're seeing is a replay of some of the things we've seen in Gaza, mass evacuations. I mean, you issue an evacuation notice for an area that's 10% of Lebanese territory in the south, and today they've just added to it another area. These areas are home to at least 400,000, 500,000 people, more than that. And then the southern suburbs, it's the same story. So mass evacuation notices, the targeting of the Israeli policymakers have threatened that they will target ambulances. They're accusing ambulances of carrying Hezbollah members. We're seeing the destruction, the utter destruction of entire neighborhoods. In the previous war, it was more targeted, pinpoint. Now we're seeing just entire neighborhoods in the southern suburbs. It's no more just about where Hezbollah may have military assets. It's basically a collective punishment of the entire population. And again, the threats of not allowing people to go back. So there's a lot of concern around all of this. And this is, again, adding to pressures internally. I had previously called this a suicide mission on behalf of Hezbollah, were they to undertake such an action. A suicide mission because Israeli air power and missile power is much stronger than anything Hezbollah can deploy from Lebanon. And the Lebanese today are paying the price. At the same time, from their perspective, they saw this as an existential war from their perspective, again, not something that many Lebanese buy into.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good morning and welcome to our viewers in the United States and all around the world. I'm Rahel Solomon, live in New York.
And I'm Eleni Giancos, live in Dubai. We're following breaking news on day 18 of the war with Iran. Israeli sources say the IDF has targeted Iran's top security official, Ali Larijani, in a strike in Tehran. The Israeli military is now awaiting the results of the strike to learn if he was killed. This comes as Israel says its fighter jets hit targets in several Iranian cities, including Shiraz and Tehran. The IDF says dozens of munitions were dropped. Meantime, smoke could be seen rising in Beirut overnight after Israel said it was launching more strikes against Hezbollah targets. The IDF is also expanding its ground operation in southern Lebanon. Strikes in Iraq reported as well. This video from Baghdad shows an explosion in the vicinity of the U.S. embassy. Iraqi officials say the embassy and a hotel were targeted by drones, and an oil field in southern Iraq also came under attack. Lots to get through here. We've got CNN's Aaron Lieberman joining us now live from Tel Aviv. Aaron, good to see you. I want to talk about the Israeli sources saying that the IDF struck the complex where Ali Larijani was based. We don't have details yet of the status, the success of that strike, but give me a sense of what you've learned with regards to this strike.
Ali Larijani was one of the most important and senior officials within Iran's leadership. It's also noteworthy that he was one of the most vocal and visible. Here we are more than 2.5 weeks into the war. Israel making clear now that in addition to the targeted killings and assassinations we have seen since the start of the war, they will continue to go after Iran's top leadership. And Larijani is one of the key decision makers, if not the key decision maker at this point. An Israeli source tells us he was targeted in a strike last night in the Iranian capital of Tehran. But as you pointed out, there is nothing not known, a battle damage assessment yet, which is the name for the assessment on whether Larijani had been killed in the strike. So we are awaiting that. It is noteworthy that the Israeli military chief of staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, said in a situational assessment this morning that Israel had, quote, significant achievements last night in Iran. He didn't mention Larijani or talk about targeting any of Iran's leadership, but it's very possible this is what he was referring to. So what we see here is a continuation of Israel's plan to decapitate and go after Iran's leadership and do what it can to weaken and destroy the Iranian regime. Eleni, we will wait for the latest updates on whether there is an assessment on whether that strike was successful, but you see the intent here as Israel also carries out waves of strikes in other cities across Iran.
Yeah, and we've seen these strikes increasing. I also want to focus on Lebanon because the IDF is expanding the ground offensive in the southern part of the country. We've also seen a lot of strikes in the capital, Beirut. Give me an idea of, firstly, how the operation is going, what their intention is, and if there's a timeline to what we're seeing, as many countries are calling for an end to hostilities, particularly in Lebanon.
Let's compare the timeline to Iran for a second. Israel has made clear that the timeline with Iran is at least 3 more weeks. We expect the timeline with Lebanon could go beyond that and potentially weeks beyond that. Part of that is because Israel is waiting to free up its air force from Iran to commit it to Lebanon. And that's where we'll see perhaps and potentially a larger influx and invasion of ground troops. Right now, what we're seeing on the ground is Israeli forces pushing deeper in, still a few kilometers at this point. We haven't seen thousands upon thousands of Israeli ground troops cross the border in what would be clearly a ground invasion. But Israel's presence and seizure of territory in southern Lebanon is certainly expanding as they target Hezbollah. We have seen strikes not only in southern Lebanon, but also in the capital of Beirut. Israel in particular going after the Dahya area, which is considered a Hezbollah stronghold. Meanwhile, the death toll in Lebanon continues to soar. The Lebanese Ministry of Public Health says nearly 900 have been killed so far in Lebanon, including more than 100 children. So we see an expansion here, even as, Eleni, as you pointed out, Western countries, including France, the UK, Germany, Italy, warning and issuing a call for a de-escalation and warning of what would be a disastrous humanitarian situation if Israel carries out an all-out ground invasion of Lebanon.
All right, Aaron Lieberman, thanks so much for that update. Aaron, for us in Tel Aviv. Well, President Trump says he will soon announce the countries that have agreed to help the U.S. reopen the Strait of Hormuz. His comments come as EU foreign ministers decide against expanding their naval operations around the key waterway. The EU's foreign policy chief says the Strait of Hormuz is out of NATO's area of action. Over the weekend, President Trump warning that NATO faces a very bad future if the alliance does not assist the U.S. in helping to reopen the strait. And on Monday, he blasted allies for not backing U.S. naval forces in the region. Listen to this.
We defend all these countries, and then do you have any minesweepers? And they say, well, would it be possible for us not to get involved? I've been saying it for a long time. This is the greatest thing to come out of this. We spend trillions and trillions of dollars on NATO to defend other countries. And I always said, but if it ever comes time to defend us, they're not going to be there. Many of them would not be there. And we're going to have to start thinking more wisely in this country.
Right, drone and missile strikes from Iran are causing major air travel disruptions across the Gulf region, including here in the UAE, where Aviation Authority closed the country's airspace for about 2 hours earlier today as a precautionary measure, and that's as flights at Dubai International Airport were temporarily suspended on Monday as well after a drone hit a fuel tank, causing a major fire. No one was injured. Fire is under control, according to authorities. Now, there are new attacks, though, on key oil facilities here in the region as well, in the UAE in particular. CNN's Paula Hancock is live in Abu Dhabi with the details. I want to start off with the Fujairah oil terminal because this is the largest of its kind in the region. It's a key storage facility. It also bypasses the Strait of Hormuz, and we've seen many attacks just in a few days.
That's right, Eleni. Yes, exactly what you just said. And certainly this is on the east coast of the UAE. So it does not feel the need. It doesn't have the need to go through the Strait of Hormuz, which is obviously the key at this point. But this is why Iran is targeting it. And what we have seen is 2 days in a row, Fujairah being targeted. We know there was a fire on Monday, a fire again this Tuesday. And also just off the coast of Fujairah, an oil tanker has been targeted. This was on anchor, so it was not moving at the time. There's minor structural damage, but it brings to 21 the number of tankers that have been targeted by Tehran, according to figures we have from the UK Maritime Agency. And then further inland, you look at the massive Shah oil field that has been targeted as well. We understand that production there was suspended. They are assessing damage at this point from a drone attack. But according to ADNOC, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, they say that this is one of the largest oil fields in the world. So you can see the theme here by Tehran. They are not targeting US political and military targets. They're not looking at even US affiliated targets at this point. This is purely the energy infrastructure in the UAE as they are trying to impact the economy and impact the reputation of the UAE. We had heard from Iranian officials saying that residents should avoid docks and ports in the UAE because that was going to be their target. Now, here in Abu Dhabi as well, we know that there has been one more person killed by debris from the interception of a projectile incoming, a Pakistan national, bringing the death toll here in the UAE to 8. And also airports have been targeted by Tehran. Again, not something that is affiliated with US military or political interests. But we have been seeing 2 days now of intermittent suspension of air travel at a time when air travel is extremely restricted as it is. Eleni?
All right, Paula Hancock, thanks so much for that update. Rashid Al-Mohanadi joins us now live from Doha. He's a fellow with the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. Really good to have you with us. I mean, so much happening. And I want to start actually with what we're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz. You're seeing another vessel that has been targeted. It's the 21st vessel that has been hit. Qatar, of course, calling force majeure on gas products as well as gas exports as a whole. What is your assessment on the efforts by President Trump to create a coalition to try and get naval escorts through the strait? Do you think that shippers and countries alike in the Gulf region are going to feel safe to, get their products out into the international market?
Well, there is precedent for this. In the 1980s, during the Iraq-Iran war, U.S. frigates and destroyers were escorting Kuwaiti oil tankers out of the Gulf because of the targeting of the Iranians to Kuwaiti and Gulf oil. So there is precedent when it comes to the military option. Of course, I think Gulf states would prefer a diplomatic solution to ease the tension and ease this restriction on the Strait of Hormuz. But my assessment, it'll be a mix of a diplomatic approach, but also degradation of Iranian military capabilities at the Strait, especially when it comes to asymmetric capabilities like drones and USVs. So I think it's possible because the global economy cannot withstand more shocks. Last time I was asked about this, I said this is not an energy crisis. This is a crisis of energy and all the associated industries to it, fertilizer, semiconductors, and in addition to others. So the world has to work together towards opening the strait. The question is just how at this stage.
Yes, and of course they've got to work it out diplomatically. There are legal and political issues that could delay this even further. But you mentioned something really important in the continued strikes by Iran, not only to Qatar, but also here across the Gulf region. Just this morning, we also saw interceptions here in Dubai. The President Trump keeps talking about, degrading a large portion of Iran's military capabilities. And I wonder how the GCC as a whole, Gulf regions, are assessing the successes right now by Israel and the United States in Iran, and whether that would perhaps bring a hard stop to the assault that everyone in this region has been dealing with in the past 2 weeks.
Of course. So from a military perspective, Iran's capabilities have been severely degraded. We've seen a reduction in missile attacks, drone attacks. But also, on the other hand, we saw adaptation from Gulf militaries, especially when it comes to dealing with drones. So initially, the interception rates for drones at the start of the war from Gulf actors was okay, but now it's almost full neutralization in many cases. Unfortunately, that one drone does eventually go in, and that's enough damage to stop production. My assessment from the military perspective, Iran's capability has been extremely degraded, and their strategic options are becoming more and more limited. So potentially, with more degradation to their capabilities, they might be more opted for a diplomatic solution at this stage.
Rashid, do you believe that we're sitting and being stuck in an escalation trap right now? And I kind of refer to what happened at Kharg Island, the Iranians coming out and saying we're going to retaliate, and then coming in and saying we're going to strike ports and any U.S. assets, specifically in the UAE. And we've seen that, frankly, materialize with critical energy infrastructure that has been targeted in the last few days. So is this an escalation trap?
I don't like the term escalation trap, but what we see is that the Iranians have been targeting oil and gas facilities even before the U.S. Struck Kharg Island a few days ago. The Ras Laffan LNG facilities were or attacked during the first days of the war. So I think we should differentiate between rhetoric coming out of Tehran and actual operational facts. Operational facts tell us that since day one, Tehran targeted civilian infrastructure in the Gulf. They've targeted energy infrastructure in the Gulf, and it's not reciprocation. They were going all out, but because Gulf defenses were quite capable in stopping disaster happening, we see that most of our facilities are still intact and most of our societies are still in harmony. But I believe that since day one, that was Iran's strategy.
Welcome back. I'm Eleni Jokos, live in Dubai, and I want to bring you up to speed with all the latest coming through from the region. An Israeli source saying the IDF targeted Iran's top security official Ali Larijani in a strike in Tehran overnight. The Israeli military is still awaiting the results of that strike to learn if Larijani was killed. Meanwhile, we're seeing new attacks on Baghdad in neighboring Iraq. That's coming through today. Iraqi officials saying Iranian drones targeted the U.S. embassy in the heavily fortified Green Zone. Iraq's Interior Ministry confirming another drone fell near the Al Rashid Hotel in the Iraqi capital. Authorities say there are no casualties. Live now to Cairo, and we've got H.A. Helia. He is a Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies. H.A., great to have you with us. I want to start off with this news of the Israelis coming out and saying there was a strike overnight in Tehran. They were targeting Ali Larijani. We don't know the status of Ali Larijani just yet, but I wonder, from your perspective, what the potential death of this man would mean for Iran's network of leaders, and would it be a blow to the regime?
Thank you very much, Eleni. Always happy to be on the program. So I think we need to keep in mind Iran's regime is in existential crisis mode. which means that it's been preparing not just for the past few months, not even, I would argue, for the past year, but longer than that, for precisely these sorts of eventualities. When Khamenei was assassinated, they had a plan, they put it into process very quickly. We have reports from, I think, some months ago now, indicating that anything up to sort of 4 levels down, commanders and senior officials were told to appoint their successors in the event of death or an assassination. So I think that if Larijani has been killed, and of course that has not been confirmed yet, then it simply means that the next person on that list is going to take over and the system will continue. The system is most concerned right now about maintaining its...
So actually, I've just heard news from my team saying that the IDF is saying that the strike was successful, that Ali Larijani has been killed. So how consequential is this?
So as I said, I think that the next person on the list will then immediately take over. And I think that that person on the list will also have somebody else that is ready to take over in the event of his assassination. The system is built for resilience. And I think that they will continue to have the system work and the regime maintain resilience in the coming period. They've been preparing for this, and I think we've seen that over the past few weeks.
All right, and my team just tells me we haven't heard from the Iranians yet, that a message will be released very soon. So we're going to wait for that, HA, because this is, a major development that we're seeing coming through this morning. I want to talk about the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump saying he's going to be announcing very soon the coalition of countries that have agreed to help escorting vessels through that choke point. There is precedent. We've seen this happening before. But there are political and military hurdles that these countries would have to overcome before agreeing to this. Do you think there's a huge likelihood that we'll see countries joining in?
I think you might see a few, but I think we've already seen that a number of American allies that the United States contacted to be a part of this coalition have dithered or said no, or said they need to have more details. It's reminiscent of, the Board of Peace and trying to get countries, particularly in Europe, to sign up, and they wouldn't. And in the end, you did get some people outside of the immediate region which felt that they had real skin in the game to actually be a part of the Board of Peace, but you didn't have much in the way of international acceptance of it. And I think that when it comes to this, you're also going to see very few countries willing to put their forces into the theater without having much more of a say of how the theater is actually dealt with. And I don't think anybody thinks that they would have influence over that because it's really being done directly from the White House. And I think they'd rather see negotiations between the parties take place instead, because it's very difficult for you to actually take control of the straits to the degree where you can think that everything is actually safe, because it doesn't take that much to upset that calculus at all from the Iranians. A few drones, one strike, that's it.
So exactly, and I mean, just the threat of a strike deters shippers, frankly. I want you to tell me about the security architecture and how what we're seeing now is going to fundamentally change what we're going to expect in the Gulf as a whole. And importantly, even bringing in other countries to assist with the Strait, for example, that is also going to change the security architecture. They're going to have to be rules of engagement in terms of how countries and these naval escorts from other countries respond.
So this has been the problem in the region, not just over the last few weeks and the last few months, but arguably many years and decades. The region's security architecture depends tremendously on an external underwriter, in this case the United States, to provide that security. It's something that many of the Gulf states have not been happy with relying upon, even though they don't want to replace the United States per se or eject it in that regard. But they need to have some sort of system in place that allows them to be more resilient without that external support. And they've been trying to do that over recent years because they simply don't regard the United States as incredibly reliable. And at this moment in time, what we've seen is a war waged on Iran by the U.S. and Israel, which has put the Gulf states into a very difficult position because, of course, they are bearing the brunt of retaliation from the Iranians. This isn't a security architectural framework that they're entirely happy with.
Yeah. So, AJ, I want to talk about Israel's ground invasion, the expansion of that in southern Lebanon, and what it tells you about the military objectives there.
And that's another part of the regional security architecture, Eleni. The Gulf Arab states, but also the wider region, recognize that Iran is tremendously destabilizing the region because of its proxies, because of its allied militias, and everything else that we know about the Iranians in the region. But the other threat, and the one that gets identified a lot more regularly at this time, are the Israelis, because the Israelis have carried out a genocidal war in Gaza, are occupying territory in Lebanon and Syria, and are pursuing a doctrine of paramountcy throughout the region. And when it comes to Lebanon, they've already made it clear that they're going up to and past the Litani River. We're talking about 10% of Lebanese territory already, where Lebanese will not be allowed to be, which will be essentially a buffer zone held by the Israelis on Lebanese territory. And I would argue they're going to go further and continue to hit targets in Beirut, as they've done over recent weeks and months, even during a ceasefire. And I think people are very concerned that this will look very much like what happened in Syria in 1967, where the Golan Heights were taken as a buffer zone, so-called, and never returned, and eventually almost completely depopulated. There were 130,000 people in the Golan Heights before the 1967 war. Now then there were 6,000 within a few months. The same thing could happen in South Lebanon.
All right, H.A. Helia, thank you so much. Really good to see you. We appreciate those insights. Always good to speak. I want to update you on this breaking news that we had coming through this hour. The Israeli Defense Minister now confirming that Iran's top security official, Ali Larijani, has been killed. And that was an overnight strike in Tehran. He was the secretary of Iran's Supreme National Council. And we are waiting to hear news from Iran. We are hearing that press release is coming soon. So we'll wait to hear from Iran. But for now, we have confirmation from the Israeli side that Ali Larijani was killed in an overnight raid and strike in Tehran.
The top Iranian official. The Israeli defense minister saying Iran's security chief, Ali Larijani, was killed in an overnight strike in Tehran. Larijani was a close ally of assassinated Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and helped negotiate the nuclear deal that US President Donald Trump pulled out of in 2018. Israel's defense minister saying he was one of two top officials killed. Have a listen.
I was just updated by the Chief of Staff that the Secretary of the National Security Council, Larijani, and the head of the Basij, the central repression body of Iran, Soleimani, were eliminated last night and joined the head of annihilation program, Khamenei, and all the eliminated members of the axis of evil in the depths of hell.
Well, the news coming as hopes for any sort of negotiated ceasefire appear to be stuck. Senior White House officials telling CNN it isn't clear that the new Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei's son, Moshtaba, is actually in charge. Well, in the meantime, more attacks in Iran and in Lebanon, with Israel planning a major ground offensive in Lebanon to combat the Iran-backed Hezbollah as mass evacuations continue. And Iran firing back at Israel and attacking its Gulf neighbors. Well, another death reported today here in Abu Dhabi. One person was killed by falling debris from an intercepted missile. Oil and gas fields here were hit by drones. And the US Embassy in Baghdad, again targeted by drones, with one of them reportedly striking inside the compound. Well, Ali Larijani was last heard from just days ago, speaking out against the US and Israel at a rally on Al-Quds Day. His death Another blow to Iran's top leadership as it tries to convey strength amid relentless Israeli and U.S. attacks. Nada Bashir has more.
It was just last week that Ali Larijani, Iran's top security official, was seen in public at a rally in Tehran, defying threats against him by Israel and the United States. Ali Larijani spent decades at the center of power in Iran, a conservative strategist who helped shape the Islamic Republic from within. On Tuesday, Israel's defense minister claimed Larijani was killed in an Israeli airstrike. His death would remove a veteran operator from the inner circle of power, and it comes as Israel intensifies its strikes on Iran, targeting not just military infrastructure, but senior figures tied to Iran's leadership. His death could further harden Iran's response and push both sides deeper into a widening regional conflict. And it would remove a skilled negotiator who could potentially help end the war. Who replaces him as the top security official could also signal a hardening of the regime. Born into one of Iran's most influential political families, dubbed the Iranian Kennedys by Time magazine, Larijani was also a mathematician and philosopher who wrote books on the Enlightenment thinker Immanuel Kant. He rose quickly after the 1979 revolution, becoming a trusted figure in the system. He served as Speaker of Parliament for 12 years, overseeing key legislation during some of the country's most turbulent periods. Before that, he held a series of high-profile roles: head of state broadcasting, Iran's top nuclear negotiator, and later a senior advisor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In that advisory role, Larijani helped shape Iran's approach to nuclear diplomacy, including during high-stakes standoffs with the United States. Often described as a pragmatic conservative, he was seen as a bridge between factions, navigating the space between hardliners and more moderate voices, while remaining firmly loyal to the system. But his record was also marked by controversy. The United States sanctioned Larijani earlier this year, accusing him of playing a role in the violent suppression of nationwide protests and of calling for force against demonstrators. Despite shifting political winds, Larijani remained a key figure in Iran's strategic decision-making, particularly on national security and foreign policy. Israel's targeting of Larijani raises new questions about whether this conflict is entering a more dangerous phase. Nada Bashir, CNN, in London.
Well, we've got Oren Lieberman with us this hour from Tel Aviv, and Paula Hancock is in Abu Dhabi. Oren, let me start with you. The deaths of Larijani and the Basij paramilitary commander not confirmed by Iran, but should that happen, can you explain the significance, particularly of Larijani, as targets for Israel and the likely consequence should their deaths be confirmed?
Becky, Ali Larijani was likely at the very top of Israel's target list and viewed as the de facto leader of the country after the assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei right at the beginning of this war 18 days ago. It was Larijani who Israel believes was calling the shots when it came to conducting strikes against Israel, and those strikes we have continued to see to this day, the ballistic missile launches and the sirens. But more than that, it was also Larijani that Israel assesses was leading the campaign attacking Gulf states and many of Iran's neighbors, as well as U.S. diplomatic compounds throughout the Gulf here. It was Larijani who was essentially the focus of all of this and basically at the top of what's left of the Iranian leadership's command structure. And that basically made him target number one for Israel. And we saw that attack coming last night. Israel at first announced that they had carried out strikes in Tehran as well as a number of other cities last night. And then just a short time later, earlier this morning, Israel came out, and specifically Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, came out and said that Larijani had been killed in those strikes. As you point out, we haven't seen a confirmation here from Iran yet, but Israel making clear that no matter who is next on the list, they too will be a target as Israel goes after the entire Iranian leadership structure. And that also now includes, as we have seen, the leaders of the Basij paramilitary force. It's not just the leader that Israel's military said they killed, but an Israeli source tells us that Israel believes they have killed a number of other senior leaders of the Basij. This is significant It is the force that Israel assesses the Iranian leadership uses to crack down and crush protests, such as those we saw earlier this year. Israel and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in particular have tried to speak to the Iranian people and said it will soon be their turn to try to rise up and overthrow the regime. Israel believes it is the Basij that prevents that from happening, so we'll see if this has a longer-term effect. Becky.
Oren, thank you. I want to bring in Paula, who is in the UAE in Abu Dhabi, before we talk more about the significance and likely consequence of these deaths. Paula, the attacks on the UAE and across the region continue. What is the latest?
Well, Becky, starting off here in the UAE, really the past 24, 36 hours have seen a number of repeated attacks against the energy infrastructure. We heard over the weekend from Iranian officials, the military spokesperson, saying that they would be targeting ports and docks in the UAE, warning people to evacuate from the area. And we have seen a number of these attacks. Fujairah port, just on the east of the country, has come under attack now 2 days in a row. We heard earlier this Tuesday authorities saying that they were battling a fire at that particular area. This is a significant area because it is an oil industry zone on the east of the country, so it is significant the amount of oil they can store there, and it doesn't have to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So it is able to get oil into the world without that choke point. Now, we had heard from Iran that it would be targeting there. It has been. We also know that a tanker just off the coast of Fujairah was also struck. It has minor structural damage, we're told, but that brings to 21 the number of vessels that have been impacted and targeted in this way. That's according to the UK Maritime Agency. The Shah gas field, which is about 3 hours away from where we are in Abu Dhabi, that has also been targeted. There's a fire that's been ignited. Authorities saying they have had to suspend operations for a time to try and bring that under control. And what we're seeing here is not targets that are in any way US military or politically affiliated, but we are seeing Tehran clearly wanting to inflict economic pain on the UAE and on its energy infrastructure. I want to point out the number of drones and missiles that have been fired into the UAE. This is official figures that have come for the past 24 hours. 45 drones and 10 missiles. Now that is the number of projectiles that they have actually engaged or intercepted. The number of drones is interesting because that's double what we saw from the previous 24 hours and triple what we saw for the 24 hours before that. So rather than any let-up in the Iranian retaliation, certainly here we are seeing, it appears, at least in the short term, an increase in drone activity. We're also seeing drones being intercepted in Saudi Arabia, also in Kuwait. Again, the energy infrastructure appears to be the main target of Tehran at this point. Becky?
Paula, thank you. And it's good to have Oren in Tel Aviv for us on what is an extremely busy day. Thank you both. My next guest is an expert on Iranian affairs and foreign policy, Hamid Reza Azizi, joining me from Berlin. It's good to have you, sir. I just first want you to expand on how important Ali Larijani has been to the regime as arguably its most powerful man since the war began, and the significance of his claimed killing.
Well, Larijani had what I would call a unique background in the sense that he had served at both security and also political decision-making roles in the system. He was a true insider of the Islamic Republic, but at the same time, he belonged to a faction that one may call a kind of, pragmatic, conservative, bureaucratic faction, given this background. And his role kind of elevated, especially after the 12-day war, as he was reappointed as the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. And together with Shamkhani, who was killed in the first day of the ongoing war, these two councils, Defense Council and the National Security Council, were supposed to kind of coordinate decision making. So now with both of them gone, it's very kind of uncertain how the trajectory is going to be. In a way, it is certain that factions within the kind of more hardline elements like Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, like Ahmad Vahidi, the commander of the IRGC, are going to take over.
So how destabilizing is this for the regime? Because on the one hand, it does have several layers of succession planning, of course. On the other, Larijani, a giant of Iranian politics and security for decades. What happens next?
Well, we need to look at it from the short-term and also long-term perspective. In the short term, and as long as the war continues, I don't expect it to have any significant impact on the war planning and war strategy of Iran, because after the killing of Khamenei and other officials, the system was basically relying on two persons, not just one. So on one side, it was Larijani, who was mostly in charge of the political and strategic affairs, and on the other side we had Ghalibaf, who's been primarily in charge with war planning and also war strategy. So that remains, and now maybe his role is going to be elevated. And at the same time, we had the appointment of Mohsen Rezai, former chief commander of the IRGC, as an advisor to the new supreme leader. So this core is going to kind of continue war planning, but in the longer term, because again, as part of that unique characteristic that Larijani had, he was able to act as a coordinator between different factions. So with that kind of loss, then especially in the aftermath of the war, there can be more fragmentation within the elites and more competition. So that's the way I see it at this moment, actually.
Yeah. Today is Shanbe Suri, which is the annual festival where Iranians jump over small bonfires as an act of purification and renewal before Nowruz, the Persian New Year, marking the beginning of spring. And the regime has been warning Iranians not to celebrate, arguably to control dissent. The opposition, the Reza Pahlavi, calling for Iranians to go to the streets. Explain the reality for us on the ground, if you will, and whether Israel is hoping that the elimination of Larijani and the Basij commander would motivate Iranians to take to the streets, and whether you believe that that will work.
Well, that might be part of the calculation for sure. But my assessment at this moment is that it's not going to be a one-off strike, one-off decapitation. It signals to me something like Israel entering into a new phase of decapitation strategy after probably President Trump got disappointed that the new leadership of the country was not kind of more accommodative of his demands. They didn't, come forward to make a deal. So this might be a kind of Trump green light for Israel, and we may see more of this. But in terms of the realities on the ground, as you mentioned, one thing that has been kind of evident actually since day one of the war has been a growing concern among the political and security elite of the Islamic Republic that for one reason or another people may come to the street, as you mentioned, for example, for Charshamba Suri tonight, and the security measures have been tightened, and so they have worked on it on two fronts. On one hand, we've seen growing intimidation in terms of even sending text messages to the people, threatening that they would be treated as soldiers of Israel and things like that. On the other hand, they have called on their supporters to come to the streets, to continue occupying the streets, and they benefited a lot from Ramadan. And every night, basically, they were there, and I think that will happen tonight as well.
I want finally just to close this with the following thought. Ali Larijani was if not the key interlocutor with Oman during last month's diplomatic talks. So I wonder now, is there anyone that the US and Israel, through Iran, can possibly deal with if and when the time comes for a negotiated end to this war?
Well, among the current elite, acting elite, especially those with both security and political clout, I really don't see anyone. But it might be actually Israel's plan at the moment, as it appears to me, if we assume that the United States and Israel don't have similar plans for Iran. So it might be that Israel actually wants this war to continue, as do hardliners in Iran. So that actually makes any effort to end the war in the short term very complicated, I would say.
It's good to have you, sir. Hamid Reza Azizi, your insight is so important to us. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
We begin with a stunning rebuke of Donald Trump and his war in Iran from one of his top intelligence officials. Joe Kent, director of the National Counterterrorism Center, abruptly resigned from his post today, saying that the war in Iran is a terrible mistake. Kent says Iran posed no danger to the US when the war began, and he said President Trump was pressured into starting the war by Israel. In Kent's letter of resignation, he wrote, "I pray they will reflect on what we are doing in Iran and who we're doing it for. The time for bold action is now. You can reverse course and chart a new course for our nation, or you can allow us to slip further towards decline and chaos." CNN national security reporter Haley Britsky is joining us to track this story. It's obviously gone viral online because this was a senior administration official, and a lot of what he resonated has chimed with people.
That's right, Max. Exactly as you said. I mean, this is a stunning rebuke from a senior U.S. intelligence official. It's the highest ranking sort of break that we've seen with the war thus far. And it really raises a lot of questions that have already been asked by lawmakers especially and others about why specifically this war was started. Joe Kent saying that that Iran posed no imminent threat. That's largely what the administration has used to justify the beginning of operations now almost 3 weeks ago in Iran. And I think it's worth noting as well that he points to his service as a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. There's several high-ranking veterans of those wars who serve in the Trump administration in senior roles, particularly in his national security team. One of those members, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, another veteran of those wars, who has used his service as a way of saying that the war with Iran is justified, that Iran is responsible for the death of so many U.S. service members over the years. So sort of an interesting dichotomy there. Trump saying today from the Oval Office that Kent, he has always thought was weak on security. This is, of course, someone who he nominated to be the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. But it, again, feeds into the doubt and questions that have existed here about why this war started, especially as we're seeing now 13 U.S. service members who have been killed in these operations. And it really begs the question for how much longer some of these senior officials will be able to tolerate this conflict that has a very unclear end goal, Max.
Absolutely. Haley Britsky, thank you so much. Well, Donald Trump is shrugging off the criticism lobbed at him by Joe Kent's resignation. He says he had to end the possibility of Iran getting a nuclear weapon.
You would have had a nuclear war 4 years ago. You would have had nuclear holocaust, and you would have had it again if we didn't bomb the site. So when somebody is working with us that says they didn't think Iran was a threat, we don't want those people.
Meanwhile, despite openly calling on allies to join efforts to secure the Strait of Hormuz, President Trump says the US doesn't need or want help from fellow NATO members. After NATO countries such as the UK, France and Germany rejected his overtures and refused aid in the war, a visibly frustrated president lashed out today.
All of the NATO allies agreed with us, but they don't want to, despite the fact that we help them so much. We have thousands of soldiers in different countries all over the world, and they don't want to help us, which is amazing. I mean, amazing.
Elena Treen is at the White House for us. I mean, they didn't want the war, did they? So there's an inaccuracy there, but it's interesting to see how the president is viewing Europe's actions, in particular in Canada.
No, absolutely. I mean, it was very clear from watching the president today with how frustrated he is by a lot of U.S. allies, NATO allies, to be more specific, kind of rebuffing the president's calls here to try and get involved to help in reopening the Strait of Hormuz. And that's really what seemed, them saying essentially, no, we are not going to send warships to help reopen that key waterway, which I should note is where 20% of the world's oil passes through, has really been leading the president to argue, no, we don't need them anyway. Even as I know in my conversations, Max, with people in that building behind me, they are still working very hard to see which kind of countries they can actually get on board to assist here. And the president even saying, particularly when he was talking about the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, arguing that what he would really want help with is these minesweepers. We have reporting with CNN that Iran has laid mines within the Strait of Hormuz, of course, making it even more difficult for ships to pass through. He was saying we would appreciate, the UK sending minesweeping ships, but so far they are not willing to do so. And he also, at one point, there was a bust of Churchill that is in the Oval Office. He referred to Keir Starmer as not being as great of a leader as Winston Churchill once was. But look, I also think it's important to keep some of the context in mind here. A lot of these NATO countries, some of them who you have named, Germany, the UK, who are being called on here, a lot of people are noting that in the NATO alliance, it's to come together when a member country is attacked. It's a defensive alliance. And of course, in this situation, it's the United States and Israel, which actually attacked first. That's one thing that we are hearing. And another argument as well is, when the president argues, when he was making those comments that you played, Max, he at one point argued, this might have me question the NATO alliance itself and U.S. membership, something, of course, coming from a president who has openly flirted with this idea of withdrawing support from NATO, I think is leading these European leaders to take what he's saying seriously. But when he says that the U.S. is always coming to their defense and not the other way around, I'd remind you that it was actually only one time that the Article 5 alliance, or the Article 5, was actually invoked in this alliance, and that was in the immediate aftermath of this September 11th attacks, the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City. Obviously, that was the Middle East attacking the United States. So just keeping that in context here, but all to say, already the United States has very strained relationships with European allies. It's become even more of an issue in the president's second term. And I do not think what is happening here and them really kind of showing this unwillingness so far to get involved in the war to this extent is only going to add to that strain, Max.
Yeah, Article 5 also showing that the only time it was triggered, Europe did come to America's defense. And presumably they say they would as well if it was triggered again. But Elena, thank you so much. Now, meanwhile, Israel says it has killed Iran's top security official in an airstrike. Ali Larijani was a hardliner, a key decision maker, while serving as Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. The IDF described him as the de facto leader of Iran since the death of former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Tehran has yet to confirm Israel's claim. Ali Larijani's death deals another blow to Iran's top leadership as it tries to convey strength amid relentless Israeli and US attacks. CNN's Nada Bashir has more on the powerful Iranian official.
It was just last week that Ali Larijani, Iran's top security official, was seen in public at a rally in Tehran, defying threats against him by Israel and the United States. Ali Larijani spent decades at the center of power in Iran, a conservative strategist who helped shape the Islamic Republic from within. On Tuesday, Israel's defense minister claimed Larijani was killed in an Israeli airstrike. His death would remove a veteran operator from the inner circle of power, and it comes as Israel intensifies its strikes on Iran, targeting not just military infrastructure, but senior figures tied to Iran's leadership. His death could further harden Iran's response and push both sides deeper into a widening regional conflict. And it would remove a skilled negotiator who could potentially help end the war. Who replaces him as the top security official could also signal a hardening of the regime. Born into one of Iran's most influential political families, dubbed the Iranian Kennedys by Time magazine, Larijani was also a mathematician and philosopher who wrote books on the Enlightenment thinker Immanuel Kant. He rose quickly after the 1979 revolution, becoming a trusted figure in the system. He served as Speaker of Parliament for 12 years, overseeing key legislation during some of the country's most turbulent periods. Before that, he held a series of high-profile roles: head of state broadcasting, Iran's top nuclear negotiator, and later a senior advisor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In that advisory role, Larijani helped shape Iran's approach to nuclear diplomacy, including during high-stakes standoffs with the United States. Often described as a pragmatic conservative, he was seen as a bridge between factions, navigating the space between hardliners and more moderate voices, while remaining firmly loyal to the system. But his record was also marked by controversy. The United States sanctioned Larijani earlier this year, accusing him of playing a role in the violent suppression of nationwide protests and of calling for force against demonstrators. Despite shifting political winds, Larijani remained a key figure in Iran's strategic decision-making, particularly on national security and foreign policy. Israel's targeting of Larijani raises new questions about whether this conflict is entering a more dangerous phase. Nada Bashir, CNN, in London.
In the Persian Gulf, the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz isn't just affecting oil supplies, it's also causing huge concern for Gulf states that get their imported goods by boat. Now, countries like Kuwait are starting to see an inflow of crucial supplies like food and medicine over land. CNN's Nick Robertson filed this report from the Saudi-Kuwait border.
These trucks here are the new lifeline bypassing the Straits of Hormuz. The Straits of Hormuz closed for oil getting out of the Gulf, closed for goods that would normally be coming in. And right now, these convoys coming out of Saudi Arabia, going into Kuwait, they're bringing in food, they're bringing in medical supplies, they're bringing in all the equipment that would normally get to Kuwait and other Gulf countries, normally get there by ship or by air. The Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz. The airspace is closed because of all the missile strikes that are going on. And if you come round here, you can get an idea of all the different products that are on their way into Kuwait. Now, officials there aren't talking about food shortages yet, but people in Kuwait tell us, look, we're a desert kingdom. We're in the desert. It's a desert country, and we need to import 90% of our food. So this lifeline here that the Saudis say is passing about 900 trucks a day, 9,000 trucks gone through from Saudi to Kuwait, they say, since the war began, is absolutely vital. And it gets more vital the longer the war goes on. It's part of the Gulf solidarity. These trucks here are driving in from Saudi Arabia from about 1,000 miles away, about 1,800 kilometers across the whole of the Arabian Peninsula, from Saudi's western coast, from the port city of Jeddah on the Red Sea. They can do that because the Red Sea isn't blockaded. It's not under fire at the moment, which means there's a way to get all this equipment, all this food, all these medical supplies into countries like Kuwait. But right now, the Iranians have already started threatening the Red Sea with potential strikes because the USS Gerald Ford, the aircraft carrier, its battle group, are in the Red Sea at the moment. So this lifeline, vital, going to get more important if the war continues, but because the Red Sea now appears to be potentially under threat, even this way of getting around the siege of the Strait of Hormuz that Iran has put in place, even this could be under threat too. Nick Robertson, CNN, on the Saudi-Kuwait border.
Donald Trump lashes out at NATO allies, saying he doesn't need them for help with the war on Iran. This, as Israel says it has killed Iran's top security official. We'll bring you all the latest developments from the region. Then all eyes remain on the Middle East. Ukrainian President Zelensky is trying to bolster support against Russia's aggression. We'll have more on his plea to the UK Parliament today. Plus, anger in Cuba after the country's power grid collapses. We're live on the ground in Havana amid threats of a US takeover. We begin this hour with some truly stunning developments in the war with Iran. President Donald Trump says the U.S. doesn't need or want any help securing the Strait of Hormuz. This despite his public appeal to a long list of allies to join the military operation. Alongside the Irish Prime Minister today at the White House, the president once again slammed NATO. He told reporters the United States may rethink its membership in the group. Have a listen.
I think NATO's making a very foolish mistake, and I've long said that, I wonder whether or not NATO would ever be there for us. So this was a great test, because we don't need them, but they should have been there.
Meantime, Israel says it has struck another significant blow to Iran's hierarchy, killing the country's top security official, Ali Larijani. Iran has yet to confirm the IDF's claim. And in a shocking move, a senior U.S. intelligence official appointed by President Trump abruptly resigned over the war. Joe Kent, you're looking at there, who was the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, says Iran did not pose an imminent threat and the U.S. was pressured into the war by Israel. President Trump, speaking early today, called the resignation a good thing, claiming that Kent was, quote, weak on security.
If I didn't terminate Obama's horrible deal that he made, the Iran nuclear deal, you would have had a nuclear war 4 years ago. You would have had nuclear holocaust, and you would have had it again if we didn't bomb the site. So when somebody is working with us that says they didn't think Iran was a threat, we don't want those people because, and there are some people, I guess I would say that, but they're not smart people or they're not savvy people.
So much to talk about, and we have a great team to help us make sense of it all. CNN's Kevin Liptak is standing by at the White House. Our senior national security reporter, Zach Cohen, as you can see, there's in Washington. And our Jeremy Nyman is in Tel Aviv this hour. I do want to start at the White House with Kevin. And Kevin, this time yesterday, viewers who were watching our show would have heard President Trump asking, or rather, I should say, demanding that NATO allies help out in the Strait of Hormuz. Today, as we play there, he said he doesn't need the help of anyone. And it seems to me, and he said it, that he's disappointed. Why the change in tune? Just bring us up to date with that and really his reaction to those two assassinations that we have seen in Iran.
Yeah, his changing tune seems to have come about because none of the allies who he was demanding take action here were actually doing that. They had all really resisted him, suggesting that this was not their war to fight, that if they were to send their own warships to the Strait of Hormuz to escort these tankers through, that it would have to happen after the hostilities end. And so the president seems to have come to the recognition that he was being rejected by some of the United States' closest allies in Europe, and that seems to have been what led to his determination that the U.S. in fact doesn't need these countries in order to police the strait. That does raise the question of what actually the plan is now to get that waterway open where 20% of the world's oil flows through. The president did suggest that he had gotten buy-in from some countries in the Gulf, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. He said that they would be helping. But it was just yesterday when the president said that, in fact, numerous countries had agreed to join in on this, that they were, quote, on their way. He said he would provide us a list of what those countries were in the very near future, but now the president suggesting that that may have all been made up, that, in fact, these countries were not going to join in. He was asked at one point what this might mean for his view overall of NATO, whether he would rethink the American commitment to that alliance, and he said that he didn't have anything in mind. But this is a president who in the past has mused about withdrawing support from NATO. So I think as European leaders listen to this, they're certainly going to take what the president says seriously. But it does bear reminding, NATO is a defensive alliance. It calls for countries to come to the defense of a nation that is under attack. In this instance, it is the United States and Israel who did the attack, who carried out the attack on Iran, and it's led to a lot of questions among European leaders about why exactly NATO would get involved in all of this. You heard very personal attacks by the president on the leaders of Europe, in particular the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who he said again was no Winston Churchill. And so you can bet that this is just going to drive a further wedge between this Trump White House and European capitals at a moment when transatlantic ties had already been very, very strained. You did hear the president in his remarks today acknowledge the death the Iranian security chief that had been announced earlier by Israel. I think this does complicate in some ways any eventual effort by the White House to negotiate an end to this conflict. That individual had been rumored and cited as a potential interlocutor for the United States at the moment they decide to return to the negotiating table. But as President Trump repeated again today, their leaders keep dying. He doesn't actually know who they're going to be dealing with when that time comes. I think all leading to the implication that negotiations are not going to be happening anytime soon.
Yeah, well, they're not being dying, they're being killed. Let's go to Jeremy. Thanks very much. Appreciate it, Kevin. And Jeremy, let's talk about then the significant move that we have seen by Israel to go after Larijani, Soleimani, clearly trying to destabilize the regime. But where does it go from here? Really answering that question that Kevin was posing. Does Israel know at this stage who is running the country right now? Because we haven't heard from Khamenei, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the new supreme leader still has not been seen or heard from directly, other than via that purported statement that was attributed to him, released on Iranian state media. Certainly, Larijani was the de facto leader of Iran, at least in the days following the killing of the late supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, before Mojtaba Khamenei was appointed. And of course, he remained a central figure in Iran's leadership in the days following the appointment of the new supreme leader. Ali Larijani was critical to so many aspects of this regime, everything from the violent crackdown on protests that we saw earlier this year to overseeing the negotiations with the United States that ultimately did not lead to anything but the outbreak of war, with the United States and Israel carrying out those strikes more than 2 weeks ago. He was also involved in coordinating with Iran's key allies, including Russia and China. So he was a critical figure in so many respects. He was also viewed in so many ways as a relative pragmatist within the regime, and someone who could perhaps serve as somewhat of a counterweight to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, which now seems to stand as the kind of overwhelming force in this Iranian regime, particularly when you consider the fact that the new supreme leader is believed to be very close to the IRGC. And so you have to ask the question about what the long-term implications of what Israel has done here, beyond simply the fact of, who's going to be there to negotiate a potential a ceasefire agreement, who the United States could potentially work with inside of Iran once the strikes actually subside. You have to wonder what the broader strategic goal of Israel is here, especially when it's not just Larijani, but a number of other senior Iranian officials who have been killed, once again leaving the IRGC and very hardline figures, including the new supreme leader now in charge.
Yeah, very good questions that we're not much clarity on that front. Jeremy, for us in Tel Aviv, appreciate. Let me go to Zach, because it's all tied in. All these threads go back to the war that we have seen in Iran. And this resignation letter that we have seen, Zach, from Zoe Kent, that's the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. These are incredibly strong words, not just against the war, this war in Iran, in many ways against this administration. Talk us through what he said and what the reaction has been from the U.S. president.
Yeah, Joe Kent was serving in this role, it's important for people to know, as a political appointee, meaning he was placed there by President Donald Trump, and he did go through the confirmation process, and so he was approved by Congress to serve in this job that really is responsible for monitoring terrorist threats emanating both from the Middle East and elsewhere. And so his defection and his resignation is significant, particularly in the context of the Iran war. And what Joe Kent takes specific issue with is the administration's initial justification for launching this conflict. We've heard from the very senior Trump administration officials for weeks now, and even the president himself, citing an imminent threat to U.S. citizens that was posed by Iran. And that sort of has been pointed to as the underlying justification for launching this joint military operation along with Israel. But over time, the administration's explanation for why now, why did they launch this military conflict now, has really shifted needed. And even at one point, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, acknowledging that the U.S. actually had indications that Israel was going to attack Iran first, and that could prompt an Iranian retaliation. And so what Joe Kent is taking issue with here in his resignation letter is this idea that Iran posed an imminent threat. And he fundamentally says that he disagrees with that assessment. He says, I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. And he goes on to lay out a variety of other grievances that he has about the conflict, including Israel's role in what he alleges is influencing or pushing the United States into the conflict. But it really is that point about an imminent threat that this resignation letter does push back into the front and center. And we heard today from House Speaker Mike Johnson, who is one of the members of the so-called Gang of Eight. That's the most senior members of Congress. And he disputed Kent's characterization of an imminent threat or a lack thereof. Take a listen to what Johnson said when he was asked about Kent's resignation.
I don't know where Joe Kent is getting his information, but he wasn't in those briefings clearly, because the Secretary of State, the Secretary of War, and everyone, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, they had exquisite intelligence, and we understood that this was a serious moment for us. Had the president waited, I am personally convinced that we would have mass casualties of Americans, service members and others, and our installations would have been dramatically damaged. And so we had to, the president felt that he had to strike first to prevent those mass casualties.
So again, that runs counter to what we've been told. Pentagon officials acknowledged in classified settings that there was no indication that Iran was planning to attack the United States unless, or United States assets abroad, unless they were attacked first. So that once again becomes a key question here in light of Kent's resignation.
Yeah, we had President Trump also saying that Joe Kent was weak on security. Important. Thank you very much, Zach. Appreciated. And coming up in around 20 minutes or so, we'll be digging a bit deeper into claims that Iran's top security official, Ali Larijani, has been killed. I'll be joined by Alex Vatanka, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, for that. And the bigger questions, of course, are who's in charge and what does this mean for the IRGC and the regime at large. As we mentioned earlier, Donald Trump now says he does not need help from other nations to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and restore the flow of oil from the Persian Gulf. But it doesn't feel like the oil markets trust that that is going to happen. Just look at that. Oil prices are again edging higher today, up 2%, 95.58. That's a WTI crude oil. And it comes after renewed Iranian strikes on oil targets in both Iraq as well as the UAE. Iran is warning that the Strait of Hormuz cannot be the same.
Frustration in Washington. As we mentioned earlier, senior American intelligence official has announced that he is leaving his post. Joe Kent, a Trump appointee, resigning as director of the National Counterterrorism Center on X. Kent says, I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war with Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it's clear that we started this war because of pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. We're hearing conflicting claims about efforts to restart diplomatic talks between the U.S. and Iran as well. Trump administration officials tell CNN that Iran reached out to the U.S. president's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, but Trump responded that he does not want to negotiate at this time. However, Iran's foreign minister denies having any contact with Witkoff in recent days. It comes as more governments rebuff U.S. calls to help protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Let's discuss all of this with Kevin Liptak joining us live now from the White House. So, Kevin, let's start with this high-ranking U.S. intelligence official stepping down. It's interesting because he is, or I guess was, a staunch Trump ally. This is not someone that the administration can dismiss as somebody who doesn't like Trump or has been highly critical of the president's agenda. He is an army veteran, and so this issue is personal to him, essentially saying that Iran posed no imminent threat to the United States and that the only reason why the U.S. is doing it is because of pressure from Israel. Walk us through how important this resignation is.
It's hugely significant, and I think the big reason why is that this is an individual who would have had access to some of the most classified information about the run-up to this conflict. You know, if he's now saying that there was no imminent threat to the American public, that runs completely counter to what the White House has been saying since the war began, and it has to be taken seriously, given that this is an individual.
Ambassador, how big a blow to the Iranian regime are the killings, you think, of those two high-level security officials, particularly Ali Larijani, who was seen as the country's de facto leader in recent weeks?
Well, I think both are significant. Larijani was the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, which is a pretty important position, but he was also clearly functioning very close to being a deputy to the now deceased senior leader, Khomeini, perhaps even more important than the civilian president of the country, who has been kind of sidelined. So the loss of Larijani is another big hole in the top of the leadership. And the killing of the commander of the besieged militia, I think, is also significant, because that's the force of really armed thugs that have enforced discipline in the streets of Iran's cities, who are primarily, I think, responsible for killing 30,000 or more Iranian civilians last year for demonstrating. When you combine killing the commander of the besieged with what Israel and the U.S. have been doing, targeting besieged checkpoints in major cities like Tehran, destroying them as they're manned in the streets, I think it says to the besieged they're very much in the bullseye here, and I think that could have a profound effect on them.
It does seem like the IDF is targeting, as you point out, levers of control over the population in Iran. I don't know if that's to try to foment or make more possible the idea of some sort of regime change from some sort of a popular uprising. If the U.S. were to stop their side in this, do you think Israel would continue with that?
Well, I think it's possible, although many in Israel say, look, Trump started the war, Trump will end the war. That's what happened last summer. In June, when the Israelis were on their 12th day of a bombing campaign. Trump had the U.S. drop 14 bunker busters on one day and then said, okay, the war's over. Israel still had a very long target list. And the bombing of the besieged, as in all of the attacks on the Revolutionary Guard, are intended to destroy the instruments of Iranian power that both threaten us externally and threaten their own people internally.
Bill says it will pursue, find, and, quote, neutralize Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. A spokesman for the Israeli military says his country will continue to target anyone posing a threat to Israel.
Mojtaba Khamenei's fate is unknown. We neither see nor hear from him. But I can say one thing. We will continue, as we have proven, we will continue to pursue anyone who poses a threat to the state of Israel. And anyone who raises a hand against us is not immune from us. We will pursue him, find him, and neutralize him.
Iran has now confirmed that 2 of its senior officials were killed in Israeli airstrikes. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, claims the ongoing military operation is undermining the Iranian regime so that the Iranian people can remove that regime. In Lebanon, Israel says it is continuing to strike Hezbollah targets, including weapons storage facilities and launchers. Joining me now is Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon. Ambassador, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
You heard me just note there that the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, said that Israel is undermining the regime to give people a chance to then remove it. You have said yourself the time is coming very soon for Iranians to rise up. But as you know, U.S. intelligence seems to indicate that the regime is not currently in danger of falling. So I wonder, is that still a realistic goal for the Iranian people to retake their country?
Absolutely. You know, for 47 years, they were oppressed by this regime. They suffered so much. And now we are weakening the regime. Every day we target the leadership. You know, we target the IRGC and other security forces that they have there. And I think the time is coming for the Iranian people to decide about their future, to rise up and to make sure they take control of their future. You know, they waited for this opportunity for so long. Now the time is coming. We know it's not easy for them, especially after what happened in January.
That Israel, America's ally in this war, is now vowing to, quote, neutralize anyone who poses a threat to Israel. Now, that includes Iran's new supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who has not been seen or heard from since he was elected to take over from his father. And now Iran is vowing to avenge the deaths of top leaders who were taken out overnight, the most significant assassinations of any sort since the war began. In a statement,